Hey everyone, it's Nanagon again, just coming at you with a new video about fat-free framework and how to handle routing within the framework. Routing in fat-free is pretty simple. In the last video that I had, it kind of highlighted just how simple it is. The code that I have in front of us right now is the code that we had from the simple intro to the fat-free framework, and we'll go through a bunch of different, techniques on how you can use routing in fat-free. We'll go over auto-loading, adding in controllers, having parameters in your URLs, a little bit of REST mapping, caching of routes, rerouting, so you can go from one URL to another, named routes, and a little bit of dynamic route handlers. So let's get started with some of this. So we'll just do some basic stuff. We already have in here a basic route of a get at the root URL. It's hello world. Again, if I just hopped in here with my local web server, then I'll just come here so we can see this. So if I hop over here to localhost hello world, it's pretty simple. So I could change this to hello world, save it, and now this doesn't work anymore. Now I have to navigate to hello world. So we can also change this so we force it to be a post. So let's say we leave this guy, we'll make another one, but this is a post to hello world, and this is going to say, hello world, I'm a post. Deal with it. We save that, we'll go to the same URL, still says hello world, but if we were to come and make a curl request, let's see, HTTP localhost 8000 hello world, we might get a different answer. Hello world, I'm a post, deal with it. So you can see that these actually work together. There is one interesting thing that you can do. You can actually combine them together. You could be hello world get and post and assign it the same thing. This is now we have a variable we can use, framework, it's called verb. This is part of the Hive, this will come in a different tutorial. If we save that, this is a post, and then I could go to the same one, just get rid of this. This is a get. So you can see that both routes are now being posted through that. Kind of a handy little feature that we have here. So in order to introduce properly the next technique, we have to set up auto-loading properly. Fat-free thankfully makes this very, very easy. So let's start by adding a new folder. We'll just, for simplicity, we'll just call it controllers. And in here, we're going to create a controller called index controller for all of our root stuff. So here we are. Class index controller, and we'll make an endpoint, public function hello world action. And I always like to type everything that I do because it makes autocomplete so much better. And okay, so we have a hello world action in our index controller. Right now, it has no idea how to find it. So there's a handy dandy variable in the Hive. You can use this called set autoload. And we'll just do this to, let's see, from this directory, it would be controllers. So it should auto-load this. Now what you do differently from this is, instead of the function, actually I'll do this. I'll cut this, put it in our index controller for hello world action, copy that puppy. Now this is turning into a string, so this is going to be index controller hello world action. So let's see if everything still works as it should. Hello world, this is a get. And let's do a post. Hello world, this is a post. So So you can see now everything is being wrapped into a controller. This is really helpful if you want to kind of organize your code a little bit, and it's extremely important because having a bunch of functions in here will do nobody any favors. So let's make a quick change to this. Namespaces are pretty popular and they help organize your code a whole heck of a lot. They're actually quite simple to do if you just understand what is happening in the code base. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new folder here. It's called app, and we're going to throw our controllers in here, and we're going to rename controllers. It needs to be capitalized in order for namespaces to work properly. So then we have our index controller here. I renamed it really quickly index. And so we also need to change one other thing in here. This is going to be app instead. So now we have this guy running. Let's see. Just need to change this now so it's controller index. And we didn't change the name of that function, so we'll save this guy. Gotta add a namespace in there. Namespace controllers. With a couple little tweaks. Now we come over here and bam! This is a get, and I could do the same thing down here. Post PHP localhost 8000 hello world. And this is a post. You can see that puppy right there. So there are other cool things that you can do and when you're defining your routes, such as hello world / name. So you can add parameters to this, and what will happen is it will call controllers index hello world action. We save that, and it will come through this args variable right here. This is a verb, and my name is args name. There would be a lot more that we would do in here, like verifying that we actually got a name. We would, and if we didn't get a name, we wouldn't continue this, or we wouldn't add this or concatenate it. So there are other things that we would do in here, but for the sake of this tutorial, we're keeping it simple. So now, hello world no longer works because we need to do /, and then if we don't do anything, it's still not going to work. So we have to add Bob. Hello, and my name is Bob. We do Bob with a capital. We do Bob and Joe. And Bob and Job. That is not Bob and Joe. And I believe you do Bob and Joe. So all these different variations will work in fat-free, even though you probably should have, parentheses and URL encoded stuff in here. But so now we have different parameters that we could pass in there, and you could do an unlimited amount of parameters that you would want. Name, age, height. So now we'll come back here, and my age is age, and my height is args height. So my name is Bob and Joe. So now Bob and Joe aren't going to work. And let's see, 45. Well, that's not going to work because that's not totally finished either. And 4 foot 5 inches. And hello, my name is Bob and Joe, and my age is 45. My height is 4 feet 5 inches. So you can kind of get an idea of the different kinds of parameters that you can have in there. One thing that you might run into eventually is sometimes you'll get an app where you're not going to have just 1 or 2 or 3, but you might have several hundred of these if your app gets big enough. So if you have pages and pages and pages of different apps, you can see very easily how this would get overwhelming. So if we had this, and you could just see like lines and lines and lines of this, and there's another way that you can configure this through a config file, which I'll show you in another video. But here you could just imagine like, oh yeah, there's a ton of this, and there's a bunch of stuff that goes on in the background. Well, how would you handle that if you needed it to like work a little bit faster, or your routes aren't going to change, or when you push to production, your routes aren't going to change, or you just need to clear it out, and then you have your new routes. So what would you do? So there is one thing that you can do. All of these guys, and I'll even come in here and I'll show you. The code base is actually really, really nice and easy. So bhoska fat free core. We have a base. Base is where so much of this stuff lives. Actually, just a side note here, I was having some issues with the namespace because I couldn't remember exactly how to do it, and the code is fairly easy to read. I just hopped in here and I eventually was able to figure out, oh, I see what the problem was. It was just a capitalization issue that I was having. But I know the variable that this is stored in is called routes, right here. So this routes gets saved to something where you can call it with get routes. And after all these routes are done, you'll be able to get, they're all stored in this variable here. And if you followed through the code in here, you could see where routes is stored and how it gets called, but basically this is what you would do. So you would take let's get this first. Cache equals cache. Oh, no. Cache. And just make sure I'm not missing something. We're also going to need to set a variable up here called cache. All you just need to do is true. If you set it to true, it's going to do a file-based cache by default, and it saves it in your temp directory in a file named cache. So that'll be covered later, but for the basics of this tutorial, we're just covering it that way. So cache is new cache, and then what we could do is cache get. We're going to call this route cache, or actually exists would be better. Routes. So if there are no routes, well, the more proper thing is to do empty. So if it's empty, then what we're going to do is we're going to set the cache. So cache set route cache, and the value that we're going to set is, actually I'll just copy and paste it from here, is this value. And we can set we'll just say we'll do this for a whole day. So now that's being set, and we actually could do this. We could do set routes, and we could set it as routes. So now what's going to happen, before we do that, we'll do this. So we check for it, and then if empty routes, and we'll set all our routes, and if we had a config file, we would just include the one config file. It's not a big deal. Else so there we go. So now we have a route cache. I know it's a little bit of a manual process. There's probably a plugin that will come out eventually to handle something like this, but this is how we would do it manually. You enable the cache, you get a new cache, you check if it exists. If it's empty, it means there's nothing there. So then we'll set all of our routes here, and then we set the route cache so that the next time that this executes, it will actually skip this entire thing, skip all this stuff, and just go ahead and run it, because it will set our routes automatically. Oh yeah, never mind. Just thinking through this, I gotta do set routes. Now I think I got it better. I haven't even tried it out yet, but we're going to see if we can try it out. So we're going to save it. We'll come back. You can see right here, we now have a new route cache file. That's the cache key that was right there. So I called it this way with new cache. I fixed this. I needed to add a true to it. But another way that we could have called this was just doing cache instance. And that is how you can notice right here, instance and instance. In the base class, there's actually something called prefab. And this is where it comes from. It just checks a registry if the class has already been called, so it keeps one static instance of it, like a singleton. And then it just will return it. And that's how the base class works, how the cache class works. I'm going to add that puppy in there too, just for funsies, 'cause we're at the root of the project. So now it pulls from this route cache, and everything is still working just as it should. So one other thing that you're going to run into, I'll just get rid of all this. We'll just go back to making it simple. So let's say we have another action in here that is like redirected action. Public function redirect action. Now I'll just copy this stuff from here because that's what all the cool kids are doing. So in here, so in the hello world action, I'm going to put in something. We'll just make this a get for simplicity. So in here, I'm going to put a redirect. Something happened, and actually, let's do this. Name, we'll come back to that, and if your name is something, then we'll redirect. So if arg's name equals Joe, then we're going to redirect. So how you redirect in FAT-free is FW or whatever your variable is, and then reroute. And remember, everything is getting passed in through here. It's kind of loosely like a container of sorts. So reroute to redirected, and the next thing we'll want to do is we'll just mark it as false because we don't want this to be a permanent thing. It will set the headers appropriately for that to happen. So let's see what we got here. So Bob. And we left all that stuff. How about Derek? How about Gustav? How about Bob? How about Joe? And let's see if we get redirected. Yep, looks like we got redirected. And I totally forgot to put something in here. Hi, you were redirected. There. So now we know that we were redirected in there. So one other cool thing that you can do in FAT-free is back in here, you can actually assign an alias to this. So you can assign this as like redirected. Let's see here. So we just add this simply in here. So now what actually will happen is this will still look the same, still function the same. When we go back to the hello world one, hello world, Bob will still be fine. But what we're going to change in here is instead of reroute and then supplying a URL, we're now going to do that alias name that we were going to put in there. So redirected URL. So now let's see what happens when we hit Joe. So we were redirected, and the URL is still here. So what if we did something like redirected, and now the URL is super duper long, and you forgot to change the other URLs. So now I just changed the URL because maybe it needed to be updated for some reason, but it's not going to matter because I'll come back here to hello world, and there's Bob. He still works the same way, but now I go back to Joe, and Joe now redirects back to this super long URL. So it's a very handy trick if you wanted to do like log in, log out, or whatever. And if your entire platform shifted for some reason, which it happens, you won't have to like go back and change the individual URLs throughout your app. It's very, very helpful for that. There is one other cool thing in here that might be of worth. And so what we can also do is we can do the, let's see, route, get, and we're going to say it's like controller action. And then we'll do controllers, and then controller action. So by specifying this, we will be able to call our index controller manually. Now there are many other instances where you could do this, like a REST API or something else that might be helpful. And actually that's something that I'll show you in just a little bit on how you can map URLs to go directly with a controller class. But in this instance, so we have controller and action. So hello world and all that stuff. So if nothing else works, we'll call index and hello world action, and it should work just fine. So index, hello world action, and we should see, this is my name, because there's no other URL in here. We could do Bob or whatever, but it does call that controller just as it is. So that's kind of cool. We could also do redirect action. Did I not name it correctly? Redirected action. Aha! I am so smart. There we go. Now we're redirected. And you can see that's also kind of handy if you wanted to consolidate some of your stuff so that you didn't have a gazillion routes hanging out there. So that's another handy tip with that. So now I'm going to show one final handy-dandy trick, kind of in line with this last item that we did. We could do another trick called map, and then it will be just the URL that we want to use. So it would be, we'll do company / company, and then we'll call it company, and then we map it back to a class name. So I'll call this, let's see, we have that. So it would be controllers company. That's the class that it maps back to. So I'll come over here to our controllers and create a new one. It's going to be company. I'm going to paste some code in here. Company. Namespace controllers. So you can see in here, this is a get. We'll do the same thing. Let's change them all. Delete, put, post. So now if we come over to, remember we have company and then something. So company 1, 2, 3. This is a get. So now if I take company 1, 2, 3, I'll put it through curl. This is a post. And we'll do put. This is a put. And this is a delete. So you can see with this one handy little function, you're actually able to map all this stuff really quickly to get, post, put, and delete, and it is really, really handy. So the final thing that I wanted to bring up in here, I don't know if I've said final like 3 times, but the final thing that I feel was really, really necessary in here was there are really handy route event handlers that are built into FAT-free. There's not a ton of event handlers in there, but there are some, and the ones especially helpful is, they're called public function for route. Same thing where you have base and after route. So these are really, really helpful if you needed to do something like authentication, to make sure that a certain person was logged in and redirect them if necessary, log them out, whatever you need to do. So before a route is executed or after a route is executed, maybe you build your data inside of your route and then you need it executed afterwards to make sure that it's valid. So we'll do a really simple test with this. So let's say in before route, if we'll do this. We'll do it this way. Session, because F3 will also handle sessions. That's a handy tool that it has. Get session.isLoggedIn. Well, let's see here. And actually, we're going to look for if it's empty. So if it's not actually in here, then we're going to reroute to logout. And I know I haven't defined that, but I just really want you to see what's going to happen. So is logged in. If it's not is logged in, it will log us out and we'll hit the logout one. And just for the heck of it, I will just create a logout one really quick. Logout, just for simplicity. Echo, you are logged out. Okay, so if I hit anything in company, it should do this. So remember company 1, 2, 3, you are logged out. So now what if something happened where in here it was, let's see, so remember this is before route. So now what if I do it after the route? So let's say after the route, and then during the route we have, let's see, first for simplicity again, framework, set session.isLoggedIn true, and then it will echo this is again. So now if I come back here to company 1, 2, 3, this is a get. It didn't actually kick me out because it recognized there was a session. So now because there's a session, I mean I wouldn't do this in normal code, but I just want to show you an example. So now I can actually get rid of this because the session will stay between requests and I won't get kicked out because it's always checking for that session variable. But if it got cleared out for whatever reason, there. Now I'm logged out because it didn't have my session anymore. So hopefully this was a good tutorial for you on routing. There was a lot of ground to cover, but routing is such a critical part of all of our apps. If you like my tutorials, won't you go ahead and subscribe? They're lots of fun and they're going to be coming out fast and furious, hopefully. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. I appreciate it, and there will be more to come with the more people that watch them. Love some motivation. Thanks so much, guys. Take care.